Okay.
Go ahead, Doc.
We're live.
No, I'm an owl. I play golf for the group. We're called the Owls because we like to go a bit later than the larks.
Yeah.
My time clock is evenings are better. Mornings are better.
I'm a morning person in my life. That's kind of what I focus on, and I'm a napper later. I go to bed early, but last night I didn't go to bed until midnight, which is unusual for me. So,
wow,
it's all good. I just get going. I go on. Dr. Kendricks, or is Malcolm okay? I'm by Rob.
Malcolm is fine. Yeah.
Appreciate you being here to share your ideas on cholesterol and heart disease.
Thank you.
It was interesting. I always look at my I don't particularly look at my stuff. I'm doing an unusual fast for me. I often do 2 to 3 days a month, like 5 to 7 days quarterly, but now I'm doing a 14-day fast.
Blimey.
I don't know why. I'm just, I'm more of a, Dr. Nelson did 10 days and I've got to beat him. So it's a little competition here. And I'm always, about this time, I'm always looking at my levels, and my glucose is kind of running in the 70s. It got down to 45, 60. And interesting, my insulin is like 0.2.
Yeah. The problem you have here is that we use different units in Europe than you Americans. So I have to try and figure out what that means in real money.
Yeah, no, you're right.
What do you mean your insulin is 0.2?
Well, I was just looking at my insulin levels on my fast because I'm doing glucose insulin. So I'm convinced that insulin is a digestive.
How are you measuring insulin? That's why I'm.
Oh, I'm trying to have my blood drawn. I send to LabCorp, and I'm trying to sort of show. I think insulin is mostly a digestive hormone or an enzyme, whatever we want to call it, and it really isn't to regulate blood sugar. It's to convert sugars and amino acids to fat in the liver. And maybe we could talk about that also at some point, what your thoughts are on this. But
anyway, sorry I'm late.
That's all right.
I woke up with an email that my internet was down, and it was down until just a minute ago.
Oh, wow.
And I've been looking forward to Dr. Kendrick for months now. I was the one who contacted you the first time, Dr. Kendrick. I'm Dr. Nelson.
Nice to meet you. It looks
Good
like
morning, everyone.
Looks like nighttime where you are.
it may be down in Florida.
Is it all right?
It's already light in upstate New York.
Well, we've got some hot weather coming, which is unusual for us. It's going to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That is.
Wow.
Which is
I
too
think
hot.
most of us, and Dr. Nelson, you can chime in here because I know thankfully that you got Dr. Kendricks here. We've all been reading your books as the Clot Thickens, and sort of questioning everything we know about the causes of heart disease.
Good. Well, that's the point. That's kind of what the point is. Yeah.
And cholesterol science and all the lipoproteins.
If you let me, Dr. Kills, I have a little bio that I have for introducing Dr. Kendrick, and maybe we can get started with this and talk about how cholesterol definitely causes heart problems. I'm joking, by the way, and all that. Anyways, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, a widely respected general practitioner, author, and outspoken voice in the world of cardiovascular medicine based in the United Kingdom. Dr. Kendrick has spent decades in the front line of clinical care while also challenging some of the most entrenched assumptions in modern healthcare. And he's got a few books. He can talk about the books in a moment. The Great Cholesterol Con, A Statin Nation, and the Clot Thickens, which I've read recently. While I was reading, I decided to contact Dr. Kendrick, and he was good enough to answer us quickly. Dr. Kendrick is not only known for his sharp clinical insight, but also his wit, clarity, and comment to scientific integrity. He's a champion of patient-centered care and isn't afraid to question medical orthodoxy when the evidence calls for it. And I like that on the book I was reading, he often would joke a little bit. I am known for joking myself a little bit, like hanging my hat on cholesterol being the cause of heart disease. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. QQQ, if you identify them, it'll be easier for us to ask the questions for you. Let us know where you're from. And I guess the hashtag is Malcolm for, what are we giving away today?
Kill My Track t-shirt.
A t-shirt?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Dr. Kendrick, please, let's hear about one of my favorite topics, cholesterol and heart disease and all that.
As you maybe know, I am one of I used to think I was the only person in the world who thought that cholesterol had nothing to do with heart disease. But I then discovered a group called the International Network of Cholesterol Skeptics, which is actually Thinks. It's a good acronym. Was set up by Dr. Uffe Ravneskov, a Swedish doctor who's been at this for a lot longer than me, and he gathered various doctors and researchers around who all believe the same thing, which is that essentially the diet, heart, cholesterol, whatever you call it, it keeps changing its mind as to what it wants to be called. The idea that if you eat fats, saturated fats, that raises your cholesterol level, although obviously we don't have a cholesterol level, and this is then absorbed into the arteries, which you could just shorten to the cholesterol hypothesis. And I started looking at this in far too long ago, because when I was doing at university in Scotland, Scotland had the highest rate of heart disease in the world. At least it was claimed that it did. I think it probably just about did. And I started looking at it, and I sort of believed what you were told, which is you eat too much cholesterol, blah, blah, blah. And that this terrible Scottish diet was killing us all. But I also happened to travel to France quite a lot, where I looked at their diet and thought, you know what, these people eat an awful lot of saturated fat. And they do, and they did, and they still do, and they had the lowest rate of heart disease in Europe, not the world. Perhaps Japan was the lowest. Difficult to say. So I began to think, well, you know, this saturated fat or whatever you call it, it changes all the time. The problem with this hypothesis is that it mutates in front of your eyes. If you say fat, they say, oh, it's saturated fat. If you say saturated fat, they say, oh, it's a lack of monounsaturated fats. If you say, oh, what about monounsaturated fats? They tell you it's polyunsaturated fats, or it's the ratio or combination of polyunsaturated to monounsaturated to saturated, until eventually you just sort of give up and go, well, you know, you're not going to tell me what the hypothesis is. I can't really argue against it. But anyway, I very rapidly realized that the idea that saturated fat was a cause of heart disease was bunk, in that the French had a lot more saturated fat than we did in Scotland, and they had a rate of heart disease of about a fifth. So I still believed in the cholesterol in your bloodstream argument as causing plaques or thickenings to develop. But then I started looking at that and thinking, well, if saturated fat doesn't raise your cholesterol level, and it still causes heart disease, it can't be doing it to cholesterol. And anyway, it became logically impossible to understand what people were talking about. So I thought, well, what is cholesterol in the bloodstream? This is a very difficult thing to find out because it changes and mutates in front of you as you research it. Essentially, as everybody knows, we don't have cholesterol. Well, not everybody knows this. I know it. We don't have cholesterol in our bloodstream because it's not soluble in water, so it has to be carried around in a thing called a lipoprotein, a lipid protein sphere. And you have small ones, which are called high-density lipoproteins. You have low-density lipoproteins. You have very low-density lipoproteins. You have intermediate-density lipoproteins. You have, last time I looked, there was 36 versions of high-density lipoproteins. So again, when you try and actually say, well, what are we talking about with cholesterol? Are we talking about low-density lipoprotein, or the ratio of VLDLs to HDL, or the total cholesterol, or small dense LDL, or light fluffy LDL, or what are we actually talking about? Again, it changes in front of your eyes. So it's an infinitely malleable hypothesis. And then they talk about oxidized LDL, and now we're moved on to talking about particle numbers of LDL. To which I say, well, what's the difference between a particle number and the number of particles, i.e. the concentration? And no one can ever answer this question. So I sort of, it's almost like, sometimes, you know, when you attack an airplane with a missile, they throw chaff into the air to make sure your missile can never hit. It's a bit like this. Whenever you approach the target, it just throws a million things in the air, and you think, well, what am I actually aiming at? And then it changes and you flip around. So it has been a very difficult thing to get a handle on. It's become so difficult that I just thought, well, you know, the hell with it. It clearly doesn't cause heart disease because it's nonsense. It's a nonsense hypothesis. So it must be something else. So I moved on in my mind years and years ago from cholesterol causing heart disease to something else. But unfortunately, the rest of the world is still very clearly stuck with cholesterol causes heart disease, and that's that. And it seems impossible to get anyone to change their mind. However you argue it, whatever evidence you provide, it's like, you know, I don't know if you remember a movie from the 1950s called The Blob, which starred Steve McQueen. And The Blob, you kept it, as you attacked it, it grew stronger. So the thing you had to do was leave it alone. And then it died and withered. So I find with the cholesterol hypothesis, the more you attack it, the more it kind of just seems to grow stronger in people's minds. So I thought, well, there's no point in attacking it directly. I'm just going to say, so what does cause heart disease? What actually is the cause of heart disease? And then maybe people have something else to think about rather than just focusing on why it is or isn't cholesterol. I know that's a long answer. Sorry about that.
I was happy to see that there is an international society. I forget. Sorry if I mangled the name of cholesterol skeptics.
That's the one.
I think we're not officially members, Dr. Kiltz and I, but we probably are in that group.
Yeah. Well, it's not it's not like you know, a political party or something. It's a very loose, very loose organization, and we have different ideas about many things. We all have the same ideas. So there's doctors in the States, South America, South Africa, you know, Australia, you know, all of Europe, etc. There's not very many people, but it is interesting that I speak to cardiologists, I speak to other doctors now, and there does seem to be a move away from the idea that diet has anything much to do with cholesterol, other than the exact opposite of what we were already told. I mean, we were told that saturated fat causes heart disease, but it's increasingly, although it's not a direct action, is that if you eat too many carbohydrates and you are having trouble processing them, that this can increase your blood sugar level and your insulin level, and etc., etc. It also increases the level of lipoproteins in your blood, because the liver, when confronted with too many carbohydrates, step back, your body can store about 1,500 kilocalories of glucose in it at any one time. There's about 500 in your liver and 1,000 in your muscles, approximately. That's for an average person. If you keep eating carbohydrates once your stores are full, because your carbohydrates are all in the end turned into glucose effectively, If you keep eating carbohydrates at that point, the liver can only do one thing with them, and that is to convert them into fat. And it does things through a thing called de novo lipogenesis. So you keep eating carbohydrates, your liver starts pumping out more fats. It sends them out into the bloodstream in a thing called a very low density lipoprotein. And VLDLs are sometimes called, in fact, always called triglycerides, which is, again, horribly confusing because triglycerides are also 3 fatty acids attached to a glycerol molecule. So, in fact, triglycerides carry triglycerides. They are actually very low density lipoproteins. But almost no doctor you speak to has any concept or understanding of these fats. And when VLDLs go out into the body and they dump fat around the whole body and they shrink down in size, and what they become is LDL, which is otherwise known as bad cholesterol. So the source of bad cholesterol is VLDL. They shrink down and become an LDL. And so when you say, well, what raises your LDL? Well, it can't be fats because fats have nothing to do with LDL in the diet. So the only thing that could raise your LDL is eating carbohydrates. But actually, that doesn't raise your LDL, but it certainly does raise your VLDL. So once you start looking at these areas, it all becomes a completely confusing thing. But essentially, if you keep eating too many carbohydrates, your body and your liver starts to struggle. Your insulin level has to go shooting through the roof in order to drive this de novo lipogenesis. And you end up with what is effectively a form of insulin resistance, which is the underlying cause of type 2 diabetes. So, and diabetes causes heart disease. So you have a slightly more indirect methodology, but it is carbohydrates damage your metabolism in various ways, which can then lead to heart disease. As for eating fats, they have no impact on any of these things at all. Just nothing happens when you do this because fats don't go through the liver. Fats are absorbed in the bowel, and then they are put into an even bigger form of a lipoprotein called a chylomicron, which carries fats around in the bloodstream. The chylomicron loses its fats. By the way, this goes straight from the gut into your bloodstream. There's a little tube called the thoracic duct designed to do this. The body is an amazingly complicated thing. I do remember hearing about that when I did medicine when I was at university, but I don't remember hearing about the thoracic duct ever since. And most doctors have completely forgotten that it exists. But anyway, you eat fat, it ends up as fat in your bloodstream. All that fat is lost as it travels around the bloodstream, and the chylomicron shrinks right down, and then the remnants of it are absorbed into the liver. So the liver has nothing to do with fats. It has nothing to do with VLDL. It has nothing to do with LDL. And yet this is the one that people say, oh, if you eat fat, it raises your bad cholesterol level. Well, it can't. And it doesn't. And it's nonsense. And stop talking nonsense to people. The basic biological, once you start looking into this area, almost everything we're told falls to pieces because it's completely unscientific nonsense. And yet everyone still believes it. It's really strange. You feel like you're just like putting up a thing saying 2 + 2 = 4. And they're all wandering around going 2 + 2 does not equal 4, it equals 17. Well, can we just go through the mathematics here? It's like, please try to understand that what you are talking is utter scientific nonsense, start to finish. And it doesn't make any difference. I speak to doctors, they go, oh, you eat too much fat and your cholesterol goes up. It's like, well, what sort of fat? You don't have cholesterol in your bloodstream, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever heard of a chylomicron? No. Do you understand how fats and cholesterol are absorbed in the bowel? No. Do you have any idea what VLDL is? No. The level of knowledge is approximately zero. And yet everyone believes in a hypothesis that requires impossible things to occur. I do feel like someone said to me, the expression a one-eyed man is king in the land of the blind. I said, no, the one-eyed man just pokes his eye out because he's driven insane by trying to convince the blind people to actually understand what it is they are looking at. Or they can't look at it, it's blind. But I do find it I don't want you to say, I'll give up. If you don't want to believe in science, if you don't want to believe in facts, off you go, knock yourself out and eat all the wrong foods and kill yourselves. Don't say I didn't tell you. You idiots. So I do find myself thinking, what on earth is going on here? And then you take it to the LDL causing heart disease bit, which is just, again, it's just absolute incoherent nonsense. I did do a lecture once where I said that Isaac Newton, who you may have heard of, a very brilliant man, but he spent most of his life actually trying to transform. So I've got a phone going off.
Okay.
He spent. I thought I'd switched it off. He spent most of his life trying to convert lead into gold. The transmutation of lead into gold was something that fascinated him. And of course you can't. But the idea was very straightforward. Lead is a heavy metal that melts at about the same temperature as gold. They look very similar. One is quite cheap and one's expensive, and we want to turn this cheap thing to an inexpensive thing. And people spent hundreds of years trying to do this, until eventually someone came along with atomic theory and said, well, you do know that they've got a different number of protons and neutrons in their nucleus, and you do know therefore that it's actually impossible to turn one into the other. At which point, of course, the transmutation of lead into gold became obviously impossible, unless you happen to be in the middle of a collapsing neutron star where the forces are great enough to achieve this. But until they understood that, and it's like with the cholesterol hypothesis, it sounds incredibly simple. You eat too much cholesterol, your cholesterol level goes up, and cholesterol is deposited into your arteries and they thicken up, and then you get heart disease. That sounds simple, and it's so simple. I think it just drags everyone into this idea. Well, it must be this because it's obvious. It's like, well, yeah, but I want you to understand that it can't work. It's actually impossible for this to work. You know, and I can explain to you clearly why it's impossible for it to work. And I can explain people why it's impossible. So they just go, oh, well, I still think cholesterol causes heart disease, you know. Well, if you want to believe nonsense, impossible things just because they're easy to understand, off you go and knock yourselves out. So that's sort of where I am at the moment in my thinking, which is like, you know, what are you talking about?
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can. Yep.
Is, you know, why do some people live longer than others? And heart disease is obviously the leading cause of death around the globe to all of us.
Yeah.
And truly, can we stop aging and prevent death? And is our problem that we in medicine and science somehow are working to share this idea that we know the answer, but in fact, most of the time we don't?
Yes. Well, I think that, I mean, heart disease is still the leading killer in the world or something. Last time I looked. A cardiologist once said to me, my job is to get people to live long enough to die of cancer. You know, I think that we can't live forever. I think we have a natural process of decay. I think at the end of the book, I said, let's just assume for the sake of argument that we live till 100 years old. We'll all get to 100, so long as we don't do anything wrong or we don't have any genetic abnormalities. So what you're trying to do is say, well, let's knock off all the things that are going to get us early. And how do you do that? You know, could we live till 200 or 300? I don't think so. I don't think we're genetically designed to do that. You know, the oldest person that ever lived was 118, I believe, although there is some doubt that actually she stole her mother's birth certificate in order to keep getting benefits for the last 20 years of her life. But and that was a French lady. But no, I don't think we can get. I think there's exceptional people who could potentially live to say 130 or something ish. I'm just making that figure up. But I think we can all live a lot longer if we can make sure that we don't do stupid things. And stupid things would be taking drugs lifelong, for instance, to try and prevent diseases, because they all have adverse effects. And if you keep taking them for years and years and years, they are adverse effects. You know, should we, you know, you told me just before we came on air that you were doing a long-term fast. I think fasting is, I know it's good, but I don't do it because I have too little willpower to achieve it. I know that eating certain things and not, you know, don't drink too much alcohol, don't, you know, blah, 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 don't become overweight, take exercise. I mean, all the things we know. I mean, these are just general things. But we are being given wrong advice. You know, we are being given the wrong foods to eat nowadays, and we are being given the wrong advice on things to do. You know, you get someone with type 2 diabetes, and they're told, don't worry about taking carbohydrates, just control your blood sugar with insulin. It's like, what are you talking about? This is insane. Insulin is really quite damaging to your cardiovascular system. Insulin in higher levels is, I wouldn't say the word poison, but you know what I mean. The difference between a drug and poison is really in the dose, you know. And insulin is good stuff, obviously. But I don't know if you've heard of, his name's just gone. I'm thinking Matthias Rathen, it's not him. Professor Unger, I don't know if you've heard of his name. He did work 20, 30 years ago where he got rats and he removed their beta cells, and they all developed diabetes, and they too much insulin produced, and they didn't live very long. He then removed all their alpha cells, so they didn't produce any glucagon. Right? And what he found was they were perfectly capable of keeping their blood sugar under control. Their diabetes disappeared, and they were relatively healthy. And they could still cope with a glucose infusion by making the glucose went up and went down. Not quite as well as when they produced insulin. And his argument was that basically the problem in diabetes is not insulin, it's glucagon. Right? But we have this weird thinking that insulin is a wonder drug, if you like. Glucose is bad, insulin is good. No. You know, as I say to fellow doctors, why do you think it is if you give an oral glucose tolerance test, in other words, giving 50 grams of glucose, that your blood sugar goes up more than it does if you give 50 grams of glucose as an intravenous injection? That's directly into the bloodstream. So you give 50 grams of glucose directly into the bloodstream, and you give people 50 grams of glucose to drink. But if you ask them to drink it, the blood sugar level goes up higher than if you inject it straight into the veins. They say, well, how on earth does that occur? I said, because you have to think about glucagon, and you have to think about the entire metabolism, and you have to forget about insulin as this wonder substance. Because the purpose of insulin is really to control the excesses of glucagon production. That's, your body works in different ways. And obviously, when you take glucose on board, your liver's saying, well, I'm full of glucose, so I'm taking glucose on, I'll have to start shedding it out of my liver. In other words, I've got to start clearing space for this new glucose to be absorbed. But people don't think about these things, I want to say, correctly. I do have another question for people, like doctors that ask. They say there is a condition where you have no fat cells in your body whatsoever. It's called congenital generalized lipodystrophy, right? CGL. It's also called Bertinelli-Siepp syndrome. You have no fat cells, no adipose tissue. It's a very rare condition. It affects about 1 in 150,000 people or something. And I say to doctors, how many of these people do you think have type 2 diabetes? And they always say, well, none of them have type 2 diabetes. And I say the answer is they've all got type 2 diabetes. They have the most severe type 2 diabetes of any population on the planet Earth. They have such severe type 2 diabetes, huge levels of hypertriglyceridemia or hyper-VLDLemia, and they die usually of pancreatitis because the pancreases are destroyed by the fact that their hormonal and glucose balance is completely out of whack. And so I say to people, so you think obesity causes diabetes? Well, think again, you people, you stupid people. Again, it's just, you know, I look at things and I think, why is everybody thinking about this way when it's clearly nonsense? And actually, we need to be thinking about it this way. And again, it's like, you know, I've written chapters on books and this about diabetes. So can we live forever? We can live forever. We can't live forever. Can we live longer? We can live longer if we start thinking about disease properly and how we remain healthy properly, and not being given drugs after drugs to take to do stupid things that damage our body, like insulin, like statins, like cholesterol lowering drugs, like many of the blood pressure lowering drugs. They're wiping out elderly people because they're causing them to develop hypotension, and they're falling and they're fracturing their hips, and then their electrolytes in their blood are getting whacked out of kilter, so their sodiums are falling and their potassiums are going out of whack. and we're damaging their kidneys by doing these things. Yeah, there are some cases where these things are necessary. So what are we doing? Can we live forever? No, but we have to look at how we are living and what is healthy. And currently, we're in a terribly unhealthy environment, partly driven by the food companies, partly driven by the pharmaceutical industry, and partly driven by just completely stupid ideas about health that people are still clinging on to. That's a long answer. Sorry.
No, that's great. I just, and so ultimately, modern medicine somehow has this idea that if I see you on a regular basis and I draw your blood regularly and give you advice, I'm going to help make you healthier. Have we been able to prove that as a business? If you think about it, we're claiming to do something for you and give you advice on whatever the proper diet is, the measurements we do. Have we been able to do that in science, in medicine?
No. Well, I mean, the classic cases in the UK, we have a thing in primary care called Quality Outcome Framework, which you may or may not have heard of, and hopefully for you haven't heard of it. But it came in about 20 years ago, slightly longer than that, where they decided in order to create healthier people, what we're going to do is we're going to pay primary care physicians, general practitioners in my case, we're going to get them to take everyone's weight, measure the blood pressure, measure the cholesterol level, take them for diabetes, blah, 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 all sorts of things. And then we're going to get everybody's blood sugars optimum and everybody's cholesterol optimum and everybody's everything optimum. And we're going to measure this, and we're going to, and if you reach this target of 90%. So this is the largest preventive attempt in the world ever. Right. Other countries looked at this with awe and said, this is fantastic. This is what we should be doing. What I'd say to you is in the last 5-10 years, the average life expectancy in the UK has been, it's probably damaged human health in that even if people are living exactly the same amount of time, the adverse effects and the adverse side effects from the medications has definitely reduced, perhaps not as long as you live, but the years that you live are filled with as high a level of health and well-being as possible. And we're definitely not doing that because we're worrying people as well. I mean, everything is, people are terrified of having a high cholesterol level, for instance. I mean, oh my God, my cholesterol is whatever it's like. Another graph showing that when people's cholesterol levels, LDL levels are higher, they live longer after the age of 60 than if it's lower. And the higher it is, the longer they live. And you're worried about having a high LDL level. The terrible disease of LDL-emia. I said, it causes no symptoms whatsoever. And you live longer than the surrounding population. So we must treat it aggressively for years and years and years with drugs that have horrible adverse effects on people and terrify them into taking them. This is not health. This is I don't know what you'd call it, anti-health. It is like a different world of stupidity. You know, I don't wish to give the impression I'm entirely against medicine. Of course I'm not. I'm a doctor, but and you know, we you know, I had appendicitis, and if my appendix hadn't been taken out, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you. You know, my wife has just had a hip replacement. She had problems when she was growing, and her hip grew too fast. And she's going, I know because I've seen this with people, she's going to be able to walk fine. You know, in a car crash, there's so many things that are wonderful about Western medicine. It's probably the greatest achievement of mankind in many ways. However, when it comes to preventive stuff, it's an absolute disaster. I've said about the National Health Service, I said we should stop calling it the National Health Service. We should call it the National Illness Service, because it doesn't have anything to do with health. It is nothing to do with it. We have a National Illness Service, and that's fine, and that deals with illness. Or a health service, keep as far away from the illness service as possible, because they treat everything with this same paradigm. Here's something abnormal, let's normalize it. Here's something that we think we can sort out, let's sort it out. Instead of saying, well, what does health, where does health come from? It does not come from the health service. It's almost, you know, don't touch it, because it's like it'll make you unhealthy the moment you come in contact with it if you're not careful. So I you know, we have to get away from this model. This model is just bonkers, as we say in the UK. You know, and I feel very strongly about that. Yeah.
We call it healthcare, and we're really practicing sick care.
Yes, absolutely.
We have a bunch of questions, Dr. Kelsey.
We do.
Questions? let's take some of these questions.
This is from Amy, Brisket Boomers. But why do I take insulin when my blood sugar goes down? So Amy is type 1 diabetic for many years. Why do I take insulin when my blood sugar goes high and my blood sugar comes down?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I think there are obviously there's two types of diabetes. Well, there's actually one. In type 1 diabetes, you don't produce insulin because your beta cells in your pancreas have been wiped out for some reason. You probably immunological, the body attacks the cells that produce insulin. Now, without insulin, you will die. And type 1 diabetes is not really what I was talking about there. Type 1 diabetes, your body doesn't produce insulin in response to blood sugar going up and other things happening. So you have to take insulin to keep your blood sugar under control. Maybe I should have made that more clear. Type 2 diabetes is the one that most people have nowadays, which is associated with overweight and insulin resistance and whatever. Your body is actually perfectly capable of producing enough insulin, but it stops being as effective at controlling blood sugar. So this is almost, it's called diabetes. It should almost be called a different disease because the underlying problem is almost the exact opposite. So I think if you've got type 1 diabetes, ignore everything I said about insulin because you need to take insulin. All right.
As you probably know, most of the people that are watching here are following a carnivore type of way of eating. If you have a few carbs, so we're basically very low carbohydrate. Mostly carnivore eaters. There was a question there about how do you eat. You spoke about carbohydrates probably have more to do with heart disease than fats. Do you follow any type of specific way of eating?
Well, I'm more on the carnivore side than the non-carnivore side. I have actually, I try to have, I try to avoid bread and potatoes and stuff like that as much as possible. I don't eat no carbohydrates. I'll have a salad at lunchtime. I'll have a yogurts and things like that, and I will eat meat and try not to eat too much. I mean, I think you can go a bit too far. I mean, I don't think that's true. I mean, you can be perfectly healthy and never eat a carbohydrate in your life, and you don't need to eat carbohydrates for your health. And some people, like my son, is a terrible example. He's 6'2". He eats nothing. Well, he eats a huge amount of food, including lots of carbohydrates, and he's like a beanpole. Were I to eat what he ate, I'd weigh about 150. Well, whatever they call it in America, 700 pounds. So I have to be a wee bit careful, but I try to be carnivore-ish, carnivore light, should we say, and not eat too many carbohydrates. So yeah, I believe it to be the healthiest diet. Yes, definitely.
Alia, next question.
Yeah.
This one.
Chuck, a carnivore, high fat, protein, feel great, moderate exercise. Is there a need to be concerned with blood pressure numbers, 120, 80 a thing, or 170 sometimes? Good, just like 140, 90. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that the blood pressure being high is possibly a warning sign that you're not doing things wonderfully. I think we get over concerned about the blood pressure. I was looking at a review, actually, European Journal of Cardiology, so where people looked at the actual. Start again. The message at the moment is that if your blood pressure goes up, then your risk of cardiovascular disease increases linearly, kind of straight up from some level. And that level, weirdly, is supposed to be a systolic of 90. All right. Now, if you had a systolic of 90, you're in a hospital, they'd all be rushing around saying your blood pressure is too low. We must get it up. However, the figure apparently starts at this is systolic. That's the first number, the 120, the 100, the 140, which is the one that people tend to use as being the most accurate, effective number to look at. But these researchers looked at actually the research on when does the risk really start to increase, right? So at what point was your blood pressure, you'd start to think, this is getting a bit high. And essentially what they did was, they do this a lot in medical research. I did write another book called Doctoring Data, which looks at the ways that data are doctored and to make certain things look like they exist when they don't. But essentially, if you plot a curve where your systolic starts at 90, and it's 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, 150, 160, 170, whatever, then the graph that they draw currently just goes as a straight up line, left to right, right? But actually, what you see when you look at the data is that nothing much happens until about a systolic of about 160, at which point the risk does start to go up. Now, you can draw a straight line through these by what they call,
what was the number?
160.
60. Okay.
So a systolic of up to about 160, the increased risk of anything happen is really very, very small. But after that, there are increased risks, mainly of things like strokes and heart attacks. So if your systolic level is starting to cruise into the 150, 160, 170 level, you probably would like to get this down. However, again, the thing is that just because something is high, it's a bit like with the sugar thing, because something's high, the idea is if you lower it, you'll lower the risk to where it was if it was naturally low. But this is just not the case. I looked at the original study up until 1987. There had been no study looking at lowering blood pressure in what they call moderately or mild to moderately raised blood pressure. Up to then, it was just assumed that if you lowered the blood pressure, the risk would be lowered to the level that it was if that was your normal blood pressure. So they gave people over about 5 years, they gave them blood pressure lowering tablets for 5 years. There was 9,000 people in both sides of this study. So it was a big study. It was carried out in the UK. It was called the MRC, Medical Research Council study. This organization was set up for the study, really. And what they found was that after 5 years of lowering the blood pressure using beta blockers and thiazide diuretics, was that the impact on overall mortality was zero. There was no benefit in reduction of overall mortality. There was a slight reduction in strokes, and there was a slight increase in heart attacks, myocardial infarctions. And the overall benefit on cardiovascular disease was also zero. Now, when this was actually presented for the first time, I was at that meeting, and I looked at it and I thought, well, that wasn't very impressive, was it? Everybody else rushed away going, oh, we can prevent strokes by giving people blood pressure lowering tablets. I said, yeah, but you can also increase the risk of heart attacks, because one of them went down and one of them went up. Nothing happened, guys. Nothing happened.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. A lot of people don't pay attention to the overall mortality effect on these studies, because very often, like you just said, a particular intervention doesn't offer life expectancy extension.
No.
When you look at overall mortality, even if it decreases a certain parameter, yes, it might increase others, like you mentioned.
Oh yeah, I used to have a couple of slides. One was my throwing people off a cliff study to prevent heart disease, and I said that we found that throwing 100 people off a cliff prevents death from heart disease completely. It's because they die of traumatic injuries whilst landing on the ground. You have to look at the overall mortality is sort of important. With blood pressure lowering, if there might be some benefits for people, but increasingly I'm dealing with elderly people in my later part of my medical career. We were seeing people falling. We were seeing people with kidney problems. We're seeing people with acute kidney injury because of their medications and their sugars, and not their sugars, their potassiums and their sodiums were out of whack. So you have to look at, is this overall beneficial? That's the most important thing. And you're right. We have to look at that. So there's another question's come up about ApoB. Does high ApoB tell us something different than high?
Dr. Kiltz, do you have a comment, Dr. Kiltz? No. Okay.
Not yet. Not yet. I've got.
Okay.
Let me read this more questions.
Let me read this one, Alia.
You'll read this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Does a high ApoB 180 tells us something different than a high LDL-C, which is 288, in the context of a fairly strict carnivore diet my high sensitivity CRP was too low to quantify. That actually great. HDL was 74 with triglycerides 54. Great ratio. Insulin 4.5, which is optimal. Anything under 5, I think, is great.
Right.
What do you think, Dr. Kendrick?
Well, I think that, again, because I don't believe that you're looking at someone who is remarkably unimpressed by any figure of lipoproteins. But of course, the complexity here is that ApoB is the protein attached to LDL molecules. It's the protein that's attached to them so that when they go past an LDL receptor, it recognizes the LDL, it locks into it, and then the LDL is pulled into the cell. That's the function of ApoB. The ApoB is also attached to VLDL, or AKA triglycerides. All right. So what's the ApoB telling you? It's not really telling you what your LDL level is. Well, it's also attached to intermediate density lipoproteins, which nobody measures or even considers to have any purpose whatsoever. I don't know if they do or not. So people are just finding different ways of measuring irrelevant things. All right. If your high sensitivity CRP is low, there's no inflammation. If there's no inflammation, it means there's no damage being done in your arteries. So it means you are not developing heart disease. Right. Full stop, generally. Yeah, ApoB, I mean, they now have this thing of ApoB and ratios. It's like, it's just, again, it's just, as LDL is the thing that is supposed to be the lipoprotein that causes heart disease. So theoretically, that's what you should be bothered about. So why are you measuring ApoB? Well, the reason why they measure ApoB is you can't actually measure LDL really properly. But the only way to measure LDL and VLDL and HDL accurately is to use a centrifuge machine, because they have different densities, and you centrifuge them for half an hour or however long it takes. So some of them go this far out, some of them go this far out, some of them go this far out, and form little bands. And from that, you know how much LDL there is. If you don't do that, you're guessing. And that's what they call a Friedewald equation. And there are now other equations of guessing what people's LDL is. But you can actually more accurately measure ApoB as the protein. And they now call that particle. I mean, I do find myself thinking, yes, and why are we bothering to do all these things? The measurements that this person has set, yeah, the HDL is high. Is HDL protective against heart disease? No. But it just means you haven't got insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So essentially, turning it back again, if you have a high triglyceride level and a low HDL level, which is a bad pattern, all right, to see, what that means is you've got insulin resistance. Because as I said before, what happens with insulin resistance is the liver produces an awful lot more VLDLs. So that level goes up, and especially after a meal, that level goes stratospherically up. As VLDL comes out of the liver, HDL transfers proteins to it in order so that it can be signified as VLDL to the rest of the body. And the HDL, in doing that, actually disappears. So all that you're saying when you've got a high VLDL, high HDL, low VLDL level is you do not have insulin resistance, you do not have metabolic syndrome, you are not diabetic. And that's a healthy sign. Are either of these things important? Causally, no. Does the ApoB matter more than the LDL? No. No one actually knows what your LDL level is at any given time, unless they're going to do an NMR test of your particles, and then they can get a bit closer. The inaccuracy of lipoprotein testing is a little known but hugely important thing. You remember when the cholesterol hypothesis first existed, Ansel Keys did not even know there were different types of lipoproteins. He didn't know there was LDL, he didn't know there was HDL, he didn't know there was LPA, he didn't know there was VLDL. He just, I don't know what he was measuring, but it was something, probably the whole lot, which is why you get this total cholesterol measurement, which is sort of the whole lot, except you take the triglycerides and you divide it by 5, and then you multiply by 3, and then you divide by, it's complete nonsense. Just forget about it. All right, it is just nonsense, start to finish. So is it important? No, is the short answer.
Next question, Alia.
Sure. What do you, from No Carb Barb, what do you think of the lean mass hyper responder theory?
Yeah, well, it's not a theory, it's a fact. Some people who are very lean mass and eat lots and lots of fats and proteins and don't eat any carbohydrates end up with a very high LDL level. What's the hypothesis behind it? It doesn't really matter. I don't believe that. I spoke to Dave Feldman 15 years ago about this in a couple of meetings, and I didn't like his thinking, but it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter if your LDL goes up, because LDL doesn't cause heart disease. So some people, and I don't know why these ones in particular, all right, my hypothesis is very simple, which is if you eat a lot of fat and proteins, your liver doesn't produce VLDLs, right? Because there's no fat in the liver to be transported out, or there's very little fat to be transported out. Now, the VLDLs, what happens with VLDLs, because they've got this apolipoprotein B attached to them, that's quite a difficult thing for the liver to make. So it wants to have fat, if possible. Got a bit of a noise. It wants that protein back. So what happens is once the VLDL's lost its fat, the LDL shrinks down. It shrinks down to LDL, and the liver basically reabsorbs it, right? But if you're not having to produce much VLDL, the liver goes, well, I don't need to reabsorb my LDL because I'm not actually needing to make lots of VLDLs to send the fat out. So it doesn't bother. And so at that point, the LDL just rises because the liver is not taking the LDL in because it doesn't need to, it doesn't want it. Which tells us two things. It tells us that the liver controls the level of LDL, and it also tells us that the body is unconcerned about the level of LDL. Otherwise, it would not let it shoot up as high as it does. There's another fact people don't know. Again, I was explaining to this. There are children who've got a thing called homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, which means they have very few LDL receptors, hardly any, and their LDL level can be 10 times as high as normal. Right? Now, this does cause problems because that excess starts to be absorbed into tissues all around the body. If you do a liver transplant on these children, their LDL level instantly reverts to normal. Instantly. All right. So their LDL was, I don't know what it would be in European measurements would be 30, which would be about 1,000, right? And then it drops down to 150 instantly. So that tells you what the only thing you need to know. It's the liver that controls the LDL level. It's nothing else. And if the liver wants to absorb LDL, it will. And if it can't because it doesn't have the receptors, it won't. But if you're not producing VLDLs, the liver doesn't need to reabsorb LDL, so it doesn't bother in some people. And that's why their LDL level shoots up. Now, the evidence would be from these people thus far, that there is no evidence that this increases their risk of cardiovascular disease. And I know there's some controversy going on about this because the recent study seems to have created a great deal of heat and not a great deal of light, whereby they put people on, they found people who had this big increase in LDL, the hyperresponders, and measured their development of the atherosclerosis and found that there was no association with the LDL. As that's my understanding of that study anyway. So the theory isn't a theory. There are people who react like this. The question is, do you need to worry about it? And my view is you don't need to worry about it. I was speaking to a gentleman about 5 years ago from the States who told me that their LDL level was 800, I think, 800. And they'd been studied for about the last 20 years because he couldn't take statins and they couldn't find any way of lowering his LDL. But in studies, what they had found was they had no discernible heart disease, no atherosclerosis, nothing anywhere in his body. Right? And the answer to this from the researchers was, well, he's obviously protected against this high LDL by something else. Like, well, any ideas what that might be? No. It was actually a case study in the New England Journal of Medicine. So don't worry about it is my answer. Just forget about it. Your LDL level is not relevant to your risk of cardiovascular disease, even when it's at 20. No, sorry, 800. Oh, what did I say? It was 600. So, if you're looking at heart disease in my world, I don't care about your particles in your ApoB100s and your particle numbers and your ratios and all these sort of things, other than to say that if your VLDL, your triglycerides are high and your HDL is low, this means you have got signs of insulin resistance, you've got metabolic problems, and it's those metabolic problems that are your problem that need to be sorted out, not your cholesterol level.
Alia?
Next question. Yeah. All right. Chuck asks, is there a favorite CG monitor brand amongst carnivores? Apparently Walmart sells one. I don't want to waste money. Trying several. Thank you.
I don't know. Sorry, in the state, I don't know. In the States, is far more advanced in monitoring stuff than we are in the UK. I will let somebody else answer this one for you because I can't answer it.
The question is about over-the-counter continued glucose monitors, and I am aware that there are at least 3 over-the-counter ones. This one that Dr. Kills is showing is a Dexcom G7 that's prescription only. I don't know which one. You're muted, Dr. Kills.
Stello is the over-the-counter version of this.
Yes.
I'm doing it for fun. I think it may help some people that, you know, it's seeing that high glucose level all the time. You know, get them maybe to see something that says, hey, I got to do something. That's probably important. I have people that their ranges are always in the 200s. You know, that's a sign they got to do something. Mine are usually in the 60s to 90s. My average is like 70 on a carnivore diet, 1 meal a day. And when I do a fast, it goes to 45 to 55. So I think it's fun, could be helpful. Maybe more of us should do that.
Yeah, I think I would agree that for some people, finding out initially what is going on and seeing sometimes what different foodstuffs do is a good idea, because it can give you some idea of what you respond to or don't respond to, or how you respond, or what your normal levels are. I think that's good. I don't know about the monitors in the States, I'm afraid, because over here we can get them now, but they tend to be associated with people taking insulin now as well. So I think they're a good idea, but don't get obsessed by it would be probably one of my answers to that. Some people just almost live and die by the things, but I think it's a good idea to find out how you respond, what your levels are, and whether or not you're showing signs of having generally raised blood sugar levels, which are not a good thing.
It looks like we're not going to be able to get to all the answers, but this is a general, more philosophical question. So that maybe let's finish with this one, Alia.
Okay, good. Leah CS, why is this information not getting to the doctors? At my appointment yesterday, my total was up again, but everything was great. I guess total cholesterol. The doctor did admit it was confusing her.
Cognitive dissonance, my friend. That's just I mean, you know, you want to step outside of this line. I mean, I'm aware. I mean, I was accused of killing people in the States. In the UK, there's big articles in national newspapers accusing me of causing thousands of deaths, and I sued the paper and won against them. But you know, to step out of line here is a scary thing. As a patient, you're told again and again by the doctors, your cholesterol's high, you must get it down. The doctors have been given this message. You know, it's a very difficult thing to admit A, you're wrong, and B, you're surrounded by the guidelines, because in the States and in the UK, if someone's LDL is twice normal or whatever, and you don't bring it down and you say don't worry about it, and then they had a heart attack, which of course they could for other reasons, and you got sued, you would have no defense because you haven't followed the guidelines. So there's huge pressure on people to follow the guidelines, to bring the cholesterol down, to use statins, to use the new cholesterol lowering agents. And I do understand and I sympathize. It's very difficult to hang yourself out there and go, yep, it's just rubbish. And unless there's enough momentum and enough people You know, in everything in life, there's early adopters, and then there's people who never change until everybody else has changed, and everyone in between. There are people thinking differently. There's not many people as extremely sort of certain in their views as me. There are some others, but I just think it's, you know, it's difficult for doctors to go against the guidelines and their professional bodies and the medical legal profession as well. So it's just not getting out there because people ain't listening yet.
But getting it out there and us continue to talk about this.
Right.
Now we have social media, which allows us to have a broader audience to learn and ultimately take control of their own health care, because we don't have a very good track record in medicine and science. It's a focus on profits, not people. And we're forgetting about the connection of human beings in our spiritual journey. That's missed in standard medicine. And so I think we've sort of been duped.
Oh, no, I entirely agree. I mean, I say that health has got three elements to it. It's social, psychological, and physical, which I call the 3 Ps, if you accept that psychological has social has a P in front of it that you don't hear. And then they all interact. If your social world is wrong, it starts to interfere with the others. If your psychological world is wrong, it interferes with the others. If physical world is wrong. So you have to get all of these 3 things, you have to work on them all. I think we become over obsessed with the physical, and I'm very interested in the psychological element of heart disease and disease in general. I haven't really talked about that because it all becomes, some people, a bit waffly, if you like, but I think it's hugely important that we all look to ourselves to say, you know, how are your friendships? How's your work relationships? How are your relationship with your friends and family? Are you interlock with the community and other people? That's hugely important for our health. Loneliness is a disaster for people.
Yeah.
You know, things like this. So I think, yes, we're talking about here very sort of scientific-y things, but the social side of health is hugely important. Yeah.
Which may be why the claim of the blue zones may be somewhat true. I don't know how exact it is, obviously, but ultimately it's our social connections that probably is more important than anything, and our ability to prevent disease. I mean, ultimately, the microbial diseases are probably one of the biggest things that we've made a dent in, between antimicrobials and also our environmental care to reduce density and our waste that we produce, which is damaging the world.
I agree entirely, and I think that yes, we need to. Well, as I say, the health service does nothing to do with this, if you like. It should be called the disease service. The health service should be about making sure we have social connections, and old people are connected with younger people, and blah blah blah, all those things that we know this stuff. Yeah. So how do you live longer? One of the most important thing is to be socially and psychologically healthy. And the physical.
So you mean that mindset, community, and all these things have an influence in our health?
Oh, absolutely.
Which we certainly agree.
Go
ahead.
What do you think in some way our religious spiritual connections have worked to really be part of that? Although it's kind of, you know, there's some good and bad to everything. And I'm wondering if that is, in a sense, something that we humans developed because we wanted to have that social connection, which was so critical.
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, there is evidence that people who are part of churches live longer, but I'm not sure if anyone's then said, well, what about people that are members of golf clubs? You know, the social connection thing is hugely important. I think a sense of doing things for other people outside of your own. I think these are very important things as well, and they're difficult to measure. So medicine doesn't like them. You can't have, you're 3.2 compassionate and 2.8, you know, socially interconnected. These don't exist as measurements, but we kind of know ourselves inside ourselves. Are we feeling good about our place in the world? You know. I think that's hugely important, absolutely hugely important. Yeah, I couldn't, you know, overemphasize that. I mean, the number one thing that I found for the thing that kills, means that people live shorter lives with psychological illnesses such as depression. Schizophrenia was terrible, by the way, it's awful, and so and PTSD and these sort of things are hugely important. I think that, you know, we should talk more about them, but it becomes a bit like, oh, that's not medicine. It's like, it's okay. If that's not medicine, then what is? You know.
Yeah.
But you know.
Yeah, because the true family doc had connections. Nowadays, we've got 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes to it's all controlled by a profit mission and not a people mission.
When there's a study in the UK showing that we've lost it as well in the UK a lot, which is it's become a kind of production line, but that shows that patients like it if they see the same doctor who knows them and their family and whatever, and also that the patient health is improved by continuity of care with people that they get on with considerably. So we have this evidence, you know, and yet everything seems to be designed to turn everybody into a Henry T. Ford production line. You deal with bolts, you deal with screws, you deal with, you know, whatever, and you can't look at the whole person anymore. We're losing a lot of that in healthcare. Well, I think we've lost it in healthcare because no one can measure it, and it's like, you know, you can't have a man with a clipboard coming from McKinsey's going, you know, we can make ourselves 2.65% more efficient by doing this and this way. It's like, oh, get stuffed. You know, it's like, just go away, because people want people to look after them. They don't want things to look after them. They don't want algorithms, and they don't want these stupid guidelines, because the patients never fit the guidelines anyway. It's like the Procrustean bed. You've heard of Procrustes? No. Famous Greek bandit, and he captured people and then he put them on his bed, and if they were too short he stretched them, and if they were too long he cut bits off. Both processes killed them. So the Procrustean bed of medicine, I say, is, you know, we are forcing people to be a certain shape and size, and if they don't fit, you know, we chop bits off and we stretch them and we kill them. So anyway, a bit hard.
We're not all meant to be the same size. And I think there's a war against obesity, which is incorrect, because the more we fight, the bigger it gets. And maybe we should stop that. And maybe we'll see some changes when we accept and love people of their sizes, and we help coach and cheerlead people, not harass and diminish.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I'm all for, you know, the stick is never my favorite thing at all. I like a carrot. I like to make people want to do a thing and enjoy that process for themselves, because otherwise they're never going to do it anyway. That's the bottom line. It's never going to happen. So you got to want people to do it anyway. So yeah.
Dr. Kendricks, this is really amazing. We so appreciate your work. Keep doing it. We'll keep all sharing and following together. What's the new book that we should all be looking for?
Well, I'm not entirely sure at the moment. I'll have to wait for my son. He came up with the concept of doctoring data, and then he came up with the title for the Clot Thickens. So I'll have to tell him what my latest book's likely to be about, and then he'll come up with a cracking title. Because
now, your last published book was
The Clot Thickens. Yeah,
The Clot Thickens. That's the one I read. I got the other ones on Audible on cue.
Oh wow!
Let's do the giveaway.
Give me 1 second. I gotta fix something.
Yeah, and I think I may be updating a bit of the doctoring data, which is to try and get people to understand medical research and how it is distorted. Is that the right word?
Plagiarized. Well, I mean, is there a study that, you know, like, oh, this study answers all the questions, it got it right? Or are we really producing studies in order to produce sales and profits?
Well, I mean, publish or perish is the greatest disaster for research. Is you know, people don't do research because they want to do research anymore. They do research because if you don't do 10 papers a year or whatever, producing nonsense and all these new journals, so people are just, it's just a mess, frankly. And I did say to someone, you know, we trying to sort this out is like clearing the Aegean stables. It's just a massive task, basically.
This was our winner, Stacy Bennett Owens. Congratulations. Email me at ollie@drkiltz.com your address, and we will get this shipped to you.
Okay.
And your shirt size.
Well done, Stacy.
Dr. Kendrick, we had a request that you come again to our Zoom call on Monday night. So if you would like to do that, I will send you a link.
We got a link.
What time is it right now where you are?
It is 12:10.
Well, Richard Smith was in the UK, and it was like 10:30 when it started last night. So, but again, we're grateful. Love to have you on our Carnivore Conversations, and the more we share this around the globe, because ultimately, I just don't think we've proven what we know that you can do to live longer. But I think we have the advice better to enjoy today. Oh man, Alex Cannon just passed. UK carnivore, young guy. I think he was near my age, in my 60s. And again, we don't know when we're going to die. But
I think Augustus, the famous Roman
Aurelius,
Marcus Aurelius, yes, he basically said, he says, "Do not fear dying." He says, "What we should most fear is never having truly lived."
Yeah.
And I think that's probably more important. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Kendrick.
Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow. Eric,
thank you very much, Dr. Kendrick.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, everyone.